Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message.
I like the end of that lesson. It's kind of corny, if you know what I mean. All week, I was trying really hard to not say that, and there it came out anyway. Well, we are in a series this summer, a sermon series talking about this movement that Jesus makes that transforms community, that brings in a new realm of healing, spiritual restoration, generosity, and peace. And while this new mission brings hope, it also confronts fear and indifference. And we see that in historical contexts, in our Bible readings, and in our life together today. Well, the church is called to be that perpetual catalyst, helping the community, helping the world rise up, and extending God's grace and peace in every realm. And I just want to offer you that as a focus as we think about the wheat and the weeds today. Well, I would say that Meg's opening hymn about the corn growing and turning in and the corn opening up, and I can just peel those shucks back, or shuck the corn and see that bright gold corn, and I just want to slather it with butter. So I feel like that was basically the sermon right there. If you need to go back and read the words, that would be a good project this afternoon. Well, a number of years ago, my husband and I started a garden with our kids. It was their idea, actually. And we decided to try it. Maybe we were a little foolish at first. I had just a bit of experience gardening. I mean, I watched my parents garden, and I got to pull the beans, and sometimes a lot of the plant came with the beans when I pulled them, but that was my experience gardening. I knew how, right? So over the years, our garden has grown. We've added irrigation. We've added fencing to keep the neighborhood wildlife out. And it's kind of an adventure. Every year we say, okay, we're gonna make this happen this year. We're gonna grow this thing. We had too much of that last year. We had this blight in this tomato plant or whatever. And so we're always trying to find ways to improve the harvest, because that's the yummy part. But every year, no matter what we do, the weeds come up. And first I see a couple, and then the next day there's more, and then they just keep coming. And at some point, I'm exasperated with, what am I going to do with all these weeds? How am I going to keep them out of my garden, and my yard, and the rock beds, and the flower beds, and even the cracks in the driveway? So I've occasionally, you try all these different things, and sometimes I just go out there and today I'm just going to pull them all up. Well, the other day I was pulling up the weeds because it was really bothering me that they were getting in with my flowers. And as soon as I threw them in the compost bin, I looked up on an app online, and I was like, no, those were my coneflower, my bee balm, all the stuff I was trying so desperately to grow, but I didn't recognize it. next year. We'll plant it next year. Anyway, this text was fun to think about all week as I was out glistening in the sun and glistening in the heat and the smoke from the wildfires. And I thought, wow, how appropriate, all the weeds I have in my garden and all that we have here today in this lesson. It seems pretty straightforward when we read a parable, doesn't it? These are the weeds, and those people represent the weeds, and these people represent the wheat, and that's the gardener. But parables are not generally so straightforward like that. They often are written in a way that speaks more to our heart than to our head. And so that logic that we want to apply to it, we need to put aside and read this in a different way and understand what it means to be wheat and weeds in ways that are in our heart. Because those wheat and weeds are very opposite of each other. I mean, except if you're a native wildflower gardener, then there's a little bit of room to decide if it's a weed or not. But generally, when we think of wheat and weeds, they're very opposite of each other. And if we try to pin down who a weed and who a kernel of wheat is, it just does not reflect what the complexity and intricacy of life is and what it's like for us to live in community and be humans. Nothing is ever quite so black and white. Those lines we try to draw in the sand, or should we say dirt, mine is a little bit of sandy dirt, are quite fluid. They're coexistent, and it can be very difficult to discern which place those wheat and weeds are. They all grow. Sometimes the weed's better than the wheat. And when we think of what these metaphors mean, some Christian denominations might look at this parable as a strict warning about heaven and hell. Who's in and who's out? Who's doing it right and who is not? And that can make it really challenging and fear-invoking. Are we doing it right? Are we gonna get in? But that's not the theology that we understand as Lutherans. It's not about the message of who the stealthy ones are that are coming in and sowing the sin among us and being the morality police of those narratives and and how we see those things coming out in maybe in our laws and in regulations that we see passed claiming to be Christian values. Our Lutheran theology leans heavily into grace, which is a very different understanding of categorizing people in black and white, in wheat or weed terminology. Grace. It's that gift of God which we neither deserve nor can we earn. And like wheat and weeds, that grace is poured out upon us, upon all people, just like everything growing in the field is receiving the rain and the sunshine and the fertilizer and the tending. We don't have just little intermittent showers on the good stuff that we want to grow and not on the stuff we don't want to grow. God allows all of it to grow together. God allows the things that hurt as well as the things that help to grow among us. So how do we rise up as community is the question. How do we, as people of God, spend less time trying to weed out the bad and focus instead on helping the wheat to grow? How do we turn lives from little sprouts into those great big corn stalks with the corn looking all beautiful and gold and ready to butter? I'm starting to think about the state fair, I think. That's where the butter is coming from. We have all of these ways that as humans that we spend judging each other. We look at social media and see what that other person has, or we watch another car drive down our streets and see what our neighbor has. And we sometimes get into a cycle of fear that there might not be enough resources or space for us to be who we want to be, and that causes us to act in ways that are not so holy, not so helpful for others. We start to get some of those weedy things going on in our own heads. And that scarcity and that fear we start to feel shows up when we go out into the world, when we make decisions about how we're going to vote, decisions about how we're going to spend our money, how we're going to use the talents and treasures we have to impact others. It's so easy for us to get caught up in that judging, but that is God's job. Thank goodness, because I don't think we would ever get done, and it would be a miserable life if we spent all of our time judging. I think about how crummy I feel when I wake up, not from sleep, but wake up in my head and realize how picky and I've become about all the little things everybody else is doing. What do we need to do as Christians, as believers, to help the wheat grow? How do we impact the community around us and help those who are oppressed to flourish? New York Times bestselling author and former Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor writes, "Our job in a mixed field is not to give ourselves to the enemy by devoting all our energy to the destruction of weeds, but to mind our own business, so to speak. Our business being about reconciliation of the world through practices of unyielding love. If we give ourselves to that, God will take care of the rest." I take that to mean that loving my neighbor, which is what it takes for me to tend the garden, tend to all that God has entrusted to me, that loving my neighbor looks like standing up for the needs of the oppressed without my self-righteous need to throw the oppressor under the bus. And loving my neighbor looks like setting aside my personal biases and comforts and instead working to restore dignity and respect to people who have been demonized and blamed for society's problems, things that we probably think only happen on TV, but really are secretly creeping into our own lives when we least expect them. And loving my neighbor means using the gifts and the abilities that God has blessed me with, that I have been graced with, to help others bear fruit in the midst of adversity. As a mixed field of wheat and weeds, we all receive both sun and rain. We all receive God's goodness. grace abundantly given to the righteous and the unrighteous. And when God shows us such lavish generosity, how can we do anything less? Thanks be to God.
That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.